The Green River project stands as one of the most ambitious and defining landmarks of Egypt's new capital, a project where scale, design, and symbolism come together.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the UN Security Council holds session on the situation and the latest developments in the Middle East.
These issues are inseparable from the search for a sustainable political settlement of the conflict. Mr. President, the broad de-escalation that has held inside Yemen since the 2022 truce remains a crucial achievement for the parties to build on. But there are worrying indications, including reports of troop movements, that this relative calm cannot be taken for granted, particularly in a moment of regional turmoil. Moreover, Yemeni civilians continue to suffer the consequences of an unsettled conflict. The devastating Ansar Allah shelling of a Ramadan iftar gathering in Hajjah Governorate, as well as the increased number of sniper incidents near the front lines in Taiz, resulted in civilian casualties, including children. And I reiterate my call for accountability and respect for international humanitarian law. I am also concerned by the casualties during recent demonstrations in Mukalla. President Al-Alimi's call for an investigation is a welcome step, and all actors must exercise restraint. Such incidents underscore the importance of advancing dialogue and shared understandings among Southerners, a point reinforced by the civil society voices I heard during my visit. Turning to Hodeidah, the United Nations missions to support the Hodeidah Agreement concluded its mandate on the 31st of March in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2813. My office will continue to support the implementation of the agreement through engagements with the parties through our offices in Aden, in Sana'a and Amman. Achieving a nationwide ceasefire remains the priority, and we will continue our efforts to de-escalate front lines across Yemen. Mr. President, for the past 10 weeks, the parties have been in direct negotiations under UN auspices in Amman on conflict-related detainees. This is the longest round yet of negotiations on this issue. These talks show that negotiations on issues of deep importance to the Yemeni public remain possible even in today's difficult climate. While significant progress has been made, the talks have not yet come to a conclusion, and the parties need to make additional compromises to unlock the releases. I urge the parties to redouble their efforts and bring this process to a positive conclusion. And I remain grateful to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan for hosting these negotiations and the International Committee of the Red Cross for its vital role. The absence of loved ones is also felt deeply by the families of United Nations, NGO and embassy colleagues who remain arbitrarily detained by Ansar Allah. Of our 73 United Nations colleagues detained, several have been held incommunicado throughout the duration of their detention, while others have been allowed irregular contact with their families. These detentions violate United Nations privileges and immunities and are crippling the United Nations' ability to carry out its mission, with direct consequences for the Yemeni people. I continue to urge Ansar Allah to immediately and unconditionally release all detainees and to halt all criminal proceedings which lack due process. And I count on this Council's steadfast support to push for their release. Mr. President, the way forward for Yemen's peace process is not without challenges. Every escalation in the region deepens the trust deficit between the parties and the concerns with which Yemen is viewed from beyond its borders. But Yemenis need a solution for Yemen. Their future should not be held hostage to regional turmoil. An inclusive political process remains the only viable path to durably resolving the conflict, delivering a secure and prosperous future for Yemenis, and providing the guarantees that the region and the international community need, including on freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Mr. President, in a moment as uncertain as this, there is often a temptation for conflict parties to wait, to let the dust settle, to watch where the chips fall, and to hope that they'll fall in one's favor. To believe that the regional storm might rearrange the table in ways that excuse one from the discomfort of compromise. However, to bet on the storm is to bet on something no one fully controls. The Yemeni parties must instead invest in achieving a political settlement that secures a better future for the Yemeni people. I call on this Council to continue its concerted efforts to help ensure they make this choice. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Grunberg for his briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Adim Wosono.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is our third briefing to the Security Council this year. What I'm about to share is not new, but a deterioration of an already terrible situation, one which worsens every day. Across Yemen, millions of people are surviving day by day. A decade of conflict has left people hanging by a thread. More than 22 million people are surviving day to day. More than 22 million people, nearly half of the population across Yemen, need humanitarian aid, and that number is rising. This crisis is hitting the most vulnerable first and hardest. Hunger is tightening its grip. More than 18 million people face severe hunger. 2 out of every families are forced to skip meals every day. Women and children, of course, as always, hit the hardest. The nutrition crisis continues unabated. 2.2 million children under the age of 5 are acutely malnourished, and 1.3 million pregnant and breastfeeding women face life-threatening complications due to malnutrition. For too many children and too many mothers, this means irreversible, lifelong physical and cognitive damage, stunting, and even death. At the same time, the health system is collapsing. 2 out of every 5 health facilities are not fully functional, leaving more than 19 million people who need health care without it. Vaccine-preventable diseases are spreading fast. Cholera, measles, diphtheria are ravaging communities and places in numbers that place Yemen among the worst in the world. Mr. President, we are trying to respond in one of the most challenging environments in the world today. As you heard from Special Envoy Grunberg, 73 of our United Nations colleagues remain arbitrarily detained by the Houthi de facto authorities, with no or very limited communication with their families. Many of our assets have been seized and our access severely restricted. Faced with this reality, we have been forced to reassess our operations in areas held by de facto authorities. Humanitarian operations continue, and here let me pay tribute to our NGO partners working with such courage and determination, but of course change is needed. We need this Council's support to secure humanitarian access. That is desperately needed. Mr. President, it is over this grim reality that this most recent, still unresolved regional escalation looms large. Prices are rising sharply. Cooking gas is up 26%, while fuel prices have climbed 20%. This matters in a country that imports nearly everything. 90% of wheat is brought in from abroad, and milling itself requires fuel that is also imported. We are also seeing wider supply chain disruptions across the region, making supply routes more costly, less predictable, slowing down what remains of our operations. Mr. President, we cannot allow this catastrophe to continue. Our humanitarian needs and response plan seeks $2.16 billion to deliver life-saving assistance to 12 million people this year. It's a blueprint to avert a far deeper catastrophe. But right now, the gap between resources we have and the soaring humanitarian needs is widening. Last year's appeal was only 29% funded, one of the biggest shortfalls in a decade. Mr. President, let me close by reiterating again our most urgent asks of this Council. First, please use your influence to secure the release of our detained United Nations colleagues, as well as dozens of current and former staff from NGOs, civil society and the diplomatic community. Push for us to be able to carry out our work safely and without impediment for those who most urgently need our support. Second, please fund the response now. Third, support the Special Envoy's efforts to achieve peace. Without it, this cycle of death, disease, deprivation will continue. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Wosorno for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make a statement. I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And thank you, Special Envoy Gromberg and Ms. Wosorno, for your sobering briefings and for your continued determined efforts in such challenging circumstances. I would like to begin by welcoming efforts to build upon the ceasefire we have seen over the past week between Iran and the US. We thank Pakistan and all partners involved for facilitating this important step towards establishing stability in the region and working towards a return to freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. However, recent Houthi attacks against Israel threaten to further destabilize the region and undermine Yemen's security. We urge the Houthis against resuming these unacceptable attacks and refrain from dragging Yemen into the broader conflict. After years of instability and economic hardship, the Yemeni people deserve a peaceful and a secure future. To that end, I commend the strong start made by the new government of Yemen since its formation in February. Early progress on reforms sends an important signal of commitment to improving governance and economic stability. We encourage the government to sustain this momentum, to deliver tangible benefits to the Yemeni people, and to help create the conditions for durable peace and stability. The recent publication of the Yemen Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan in March highlights the deteriorating humanitarian situation. 22 million people in need of assistance, with 18.3 million people who are acutely food insecure. Conflict, economic deterioration, and the impacts of flooding and drought are pushing more communities towards emergency levels of hunger. Without urgent, sustained funding, conditions will worsen further, putting lives at risk. We need to act now and together to address these urgent needs. On the critical issue of weapons smuggling, the UK was pleased to convene members of this Council and other affected states last month for an expert briefing on arms smuggling networks utilised by the Houthis, in breach of Security Council Resolution 2254. We look forward to the panel of experts' forthcoming reporting on dual-use components and maritime interdictions. The UK will continue to support the vital work of the panel to sustain momentum in countering Houthi weapons smuggling. Finally, Mr. President, the UK continues to strongly condemn the ongoing detention of aid workers, and we once again call for their immediate release. These actions by the Houthis violate fundamental rights, due process, and shrink the operational space for international NGOs that is vital to support the growing needs of the Yemeni people. Thank you.
I thank the representative of United Kingdom for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of A3, namely the Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, and my own country, Somalia. A3 thanks Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and OCHA Director Ms. Adam Wosorno for their comprehensive briefings. We also welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen in today's meeting. Mr. President, A3 remains deeply concerned that Yemen continues to face a fragile situation marked by political uncertainty, economic deterioration, and one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises. While large-scale hostilities have not returned to previous levels, recent development underscore the continued volatility and the persistent risk of escalation. We reaffirm our full support for an inclusive, Yemeni-led, Yemeni-owned political process under the auspices of United Nations. We commend the Special Envoy's effort to insulate Yemen from the broader regional conflict. We underscore the importance of preserving the space for dialogue to advance a comprehensive political settlement. A3 remains concerned about the tensions that continue to expose the fragility of existing arrangements. We further take note of the expiration of the mandate for the UN mission to support Hudayda's agreement on March 31st, 2026, which marks a significant transition in the Security Council's engagement. We emphasize that the progress on the political track must be accompanied by a tangible improvement in the economic situation. The continued fragmentation of institutions and irregular salary payments are deepening hardship for millions. Addressing these economic challenges remain essential to supporting stability and strengthening public confidence. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in Yemen has reached a critical breaking point. The 2026 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, released on March 18, report that 22.3 million people, half of the population, now require humanitarian assistance. Furthermore, 18.3 million people face acute food insecurity. We are profoundly alarmed by the funding collapse facing the humanitarian response. The current UN appeal for $2.16 billion follows a year where a response plan was only 29% funded, the lowest in the history of Yemen crisis. These severe shortfalls have forced humanitarian actors to scale back or suspend critical life-saving programs, notably in the northern areas where WFP's operations have largely ceased due to these funding gaps and continued interference. A3 expresses grave concern regarding the continued detention of UN humanitarian personnel. Such actions, alongside interference in aid delivery, undermine operations and aggravate civilian suffering. We reiterate our call for the immediate and unconditional release of all detained personnel and emphasize the importance of safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access. Furthermore, A3 underscores the need to strengthen protection for civilians, particularly children, who continue to bear the consequence of the conflict. We call on all parties to comply fully with international humanitarian law and to cooperate with the United Nations on child protection and accountability mechanisms. To conclude, Mr. President, A3 reiterates its firm support for the Yemeni sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity. We stress that lasting peace cannot be achieved through military means, but through dialogue and sustained international engagement. We call on the international community to maintain a strong attention on Yemen and to significantly scale up financial support for the humanitarian operations to prevent further collapse of the essential services. The people of Yemen deserve a future defined not by crisis, but by stability, dignity, and opportunity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and Director Osono for the briefings, and welcome the permanent representative of Yemen to today's meeting. Lately, the sharp escalation in the Middle East has posed new challenges to the stability in Yemen and the Red Sea. The launch of the US-Iran negotiations in Pakistan is a step in the direction of easing the tension. The pressing priority is to prevent restart of fighting and maintain the hard-won momentum of ceasefire. With no efforts spared, the international community should continue to intensify efforts to promote peace talks and categorically oppose any act that could undermine ceasefire or escalate confrontation. Relevant parties should strictly observe the interim ceasefire arrangements and seek to resolve disputes by political and diplomatic means. President, over the past 2 years, amid ongoing regional turmoil, the situation in Yemen has dragged on with fluctuations. In today's Yemen, the parties to the conflict lack mutual trust. The peace process is stalled. The security situation remains fragile, and humanitarian challenges are daunting. The international community should redouble its efforts to help Yemen find a comprehensive solution to break the stalemate and work together for an early settlement of the Yemen issue. First, we must resolutely advance the political process. China calls on all parties in Yemen to show political resolve, work to relaunch the peace process, resolve differences through dialogue and negotiation, and strive for an early reconciliation and the kickoff of economic rebuilding. The international community should provide support to this end. China notes that the legitimate government of Yemen and the Houthis held meetings on the implementation of the prisoner exchange agreement. We commend the Special Envoy's office for their positive role in this regard and encourage two parties to continue communication engagement to achieve concrete results. Second, every effort must be made to maintain a stable security situation. In early March, the legitimate government of Yemen and the Houthis exchanged fire in Taiz, resulting in casualties. China calls on both parties to exercise restraint and avoid any escalatory actions. The Special Envoy's office should exercise its role as a ceasefire monitor and engage with both parties to the conflict to prevent new clashes. It is a shared responsibility of all to safeguard the security of the Red Sea shipping lanes. The rights of merchant ships from all countries to navigate these waters in accordance with international law must be fully respected. Third, the humanitarian situation requires prompt relief. The recent UN Emergency Humanitarian Response Plan for Yemen forecasts 22 million people in urgent need of humanitarian aid, an increase of 2.8 million from last year, reflecting a rapidly deteriorating trend. Some organizations note localized famine in their assessments. It is particularly alarming. China calls on the international community to provide more emergency humanitarian aid to Yemen and try to secure funding for humanitarian needs to avert a large-scale humanitarian crisis. Fourth, we must defend the bottom line of international humanitarian law. Protecting civilian and security of civilian infrastructure is an internationally recognized fundamental principle of international humanitarian law, and the safety and security of UN personnel must be effectively guaranteed. China expresses grave concern over the continued detention of 73 UN personnel and once again calls on the Houthis to release them immediately and unconditionally, thereby creating conditions for humanitarian institutions to resume operations in relevant areas. Together with the international community, China stands ready to make unrelenting efforts for the political settlement of the Yemen issue and return of peace and stability to the Middle East at an early date. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. I also thank Special Envoy Grunberg and Adam Wosono for their comprehensive briefings today. Madam President, the people of Yemen continue to suffer a vast humanitarian emergency, as we have heard from the briefers. In light of the escalating tensions in the region, it's crucial that Yemen is not further drawn into the broader conflict. Denmark strongly condemns the recent strikes by the Houthis against Israel, which also threaten greater regional destabilization. And we underscore the need for ensuring maritime security and freedom of navigation to allow for the free flow of trade and goods, including humanitarian goods. We call on the Houthis to immediately cease military actions. De-escalation is crucial also to prevent further regional spillover. Madam President, as we have heard, in 2026, more than 22 million people, including 11 million women and girls, will require humanitarian assistance and protection services across Yemen. Further deterioration of food insecurity is alarming, with more than 18 million people facing acute food insecurity. millions of children are malnourished. We urge Member States to support Yemen's humanitarian response plan to enable timely and life-saving interventions for the people of Yemen. Rapid, safe and unhindered humanitarian access to those in need is crucial, and we call on the Houthis to allow and facilitate such access in accordance with their obligations under international humanitarian law. Denmark strongly condemns the continued detention by the Houthis of 73 UN staff, along with others from civil society and diplomatic missions, and we reiterate our demand for their immediate and unconditional release. Madam President, it's critical that progress is made towards an inclusive Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political solution under UN auspices to reach a negotiated political settlement that can sustainably end this conflict. We hope further progress can be made on the exchange of conflict-related prisoners, which could contribute to the much-needed trust building between the parties. In closing, Denmark also takes note of the closure of the UN mission to support the Hudaydah Agreement on 31st March, in accordance with the Resolution 2813, with the transfer of its residual tasks to the Office of the Special Envoy. We would like to use this opportunity to thank UN colleagues that served in UNMAHA, and we reaffirm the importance for the UN to continue supporting the implementation of the Hudaydah Agreement towards lasting stability in Hudaydah and in Yemen. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and OCHA Director Adam Busurno for their insightful briefings, and I welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen in this meeting. In the light of today's briefings and evolving situation on the ground, I wish to outline 3 key points. First, we express our profound concern over the current situation in the Middle East, and we unequivocally condemn the move by the Houthis to enter the conflict by conducting direct military strikes against Israel. It risks pulling Yemen into a wider regional confrontation at a time when it is least able to handle more instability. Moreover, any escalation would not just deepen Yemen's struggles, but could see hostilities spill into the Red Sea, disrupting yet another vital maritime corridor for global trade and energy flows, and even more so for the humanitarian flows. The hostilities must come to an immediate halt, and we call on all actors to exercise utmost restraint and focus on de-escalation and dialogue. Second, amid regional turmoil, the recently published 2026 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan for Yemen paints an increasingly alarming picture. The number of people in need